Before we begin, a brief warning: viewer discretion is advised. What follows is a dramatized account meant purely for entertainment. Still, few fictional tales can match the real tension that unfolds when a titan of the silver screen steps into the chaotic arena of daytime television, only to dismantle one of its most seasoned and ferocious personalities. Today, we revisit the legendary clash that left Joy Behar momentarily stripped of her authority, her confidence rattled, and her on-air dominance forever altered. This was no petty celebrity spat. This was the day Tom Hardy's surgical precision collided with Joy's trademark barrage of interruptions and insinuations, producing fallout that felt nothing short of seismic. But before we examine this masterclass in controlled, almost clinical verbal counterstrike, make sure you're subscribed for more stories of giants colliding, and declare in the comments what becomes of those who dare to challenge the unchallengeable. Now, let us step into the furnace where this notorious confrontation was forged. The studio lights blazed with the intensity of a Colosseum sun that Tuesday morning. The views set hummed with its usual mixture of anticipation and caffeine buzz, but beneath it all lingered something sharper, something electric. Tom Hardy, revered British actor, known for roles that required him to fracture and rebuild himself psychologically, took his place in the guest chair. He was there for what should have been a routine promotional appearance. Nothing about the moment suggested turbulence. Yet no audience member, no producer, not even the panel itself could foresee that this ostensibly ordinary interview would soon enter the show's unofficial hall of infamy. Across from him, Joy Behar settled into her throne, like seat, eyes glinting with the unmistakable look she often wore when preparing an ambush. According to behind-the-scenes whispers, she had spent days combing through Hardy's old interviews, past comments, and any potential controversy she could weaponize. She came armed and ready for a signature Joy-style interrogation, a takedown delivered through jabs disguised as questions. The other hosts sensed the shift immediately. Whoopi Goldberg, Sarah Haynes, and the rest of the panel exchanged quiet glances even before cameras rolled. They had been on the show long enough to recognize the subtle atmospheric drop, the stillness that precedes a storm. Something was about to ignite, and ignite it did. With the cameras live, Joy launched her opening strike. Wearing that familiar condescending smirk reserved for guests she intended to dissect, she leaned in. "Let's talk about your comments regarding method acting," she began. "You've said some pretty intense things about how far actors should go. That's just a fancy way of saying actors should be allowed to behave badly, don't you think?" It was bold, loaded, delivered with the self-assuredness of someone who believed she already won the point. Hardy leaned back slightly, his posture relaxed but his expression razor-sharp, his blue eyes fixed on her with the chilling focus of a man accustomed to dissecting characters from the inside out. For a long, suspended moment, he didn't answer. The silence was so pronounced it felt physical. Then came the counterstrike, quiet, gravel-voiced, devastatingly measured. "Well, Joy," he began, "I believe there is a vast difference between commitment to a craft and simply behaving badly." A slight pause, perfectly timed, though I suspect you might not perceive the distinction. The words landed like precision-guided projectiles. He continued, explaining that method acting was a discipline shrouded in respect, research and intentionality, not a license for tantrums. The other hosts exchanged uneasy glances. Hardy had not deflected her provocation, he had sliced through it, exposing its underpinnings. Joy's smile faltered, barely but noticeably. She recovered quickly and escalated. "Oh, please, Tom," she scoffed. "We've all heard the tales. Actors hide behind their process, when really they're just being insufferable. Some of this method stuff is pretentious nonsense." "Pretentious nonsense," Hardy echoed, his tone almost contemplative. His accent, crisp, deliberate, amplified every syllable. "That is a fascinating diagnosis, coming from someone who has built a career offering verdicts on professions they have never practiced." Joy stiffened. "Tell me," Hardy continued, "what formal training do you have in dramatic arts? What qualifies you to dismiss techniques that have shaped performances for generations?" His calmness made the blow even sharper. A heavy silence swept the studio. Joy, visibly flushed, attempted to reassert control. "I've been in this business for over 20 years, she snapped. "I think I know a thing or two about what's genuine." 20 years of what precisely?" Hardy asked. His voice remained polite, which only magnified the sting. 20 years of observing from behind a desk, offering commentary. "Because unless I'm mistaken, your experience in performance is limited." He listed her past work hosting stand-up, then delivered the final cut, but you have never been required to dissolve yourself entirely for a role. Have you? At this point, Whoopi attempted to intervene, sensing the encounter had reached critical levels. But the damage was done. In a matter of minutes, Hardy had shifted the power dynamic so dramatically that the usual rhythm of the show collapsed. Joy, normally the one directing the interrogation, had been forced into the uncomfortable role of the interrogated. And so, the legend of that interview was born, the day a Hollywood heavyweight walked into daytime television and, with nothing more than calm precision and uncompromising logic, altered the balance of power on a battlefield Joy once ruled without challenge. Joy Behar, her pride visibly bruised, cut across her co-host before she could intervene. "I don't need to have climbed Mount Everest to know it's tall, Tom," she snapped, "and I don't need to be a method actor to recognize when someone is using it as an excuse." Hardy did not bristle. He did not flinch. His face remained an immaculate mask of calm, but the calm of a predator, not a pacifist. A stillness settled over him, the kind a grandmaster assumes when he sees his opponent march confidently into a trap they themselves have set. When he finally spoke, his voice dropped to a dangerously soft register. "That," he murmured, "is actually the perfect analogy." Joy stiffened. "You are correct," he continued. "You don't need to climb Everest to know its height. But you would need to be a mountaineer to critique a climber's technique. Would you not? You would need knowledge of rope systems, of oxygen cycles, of acclimation, of weather patterns. You would need expertise, real, earned, hard-won expertise, not merely an opinion from the base camp." Joy's eyes flashed. "Are you suggesting I'm not qualified to have opinions?" She shot back, her voice fraying with irritation. "Not at all." Hardy replied, the single phrase gliding like a satin blade. "You are eminently qualified to have opinions. Everyone is. However," he leaned forward slightly, "there is a vast chasm between holding a personal opinion and issuing authoritative judgments on professional disciplines in which one has never participated. Surely," he added with a polite nod, "a veteran of the media such as yourself can appreciate that distinction." The other panelists could not hide their discomfort now. Sarah Haynes shuffled her note cards as if searching for an escape route printed on one of them, while Whoopi Goldberg cast increasingly frantic glances toward the control room. The interview had veered so far off its planned rails that no script, no cue card, no segment map could rescue it. Joy, who normally commanded the battlefield of daytime television with breezy ferocity, found herself losing ground by the second. "You know what, Tom?" she said sharply, her tone lacquered with sarcasm to hide the wobble beneath it. "I think you are proving my point. This," she gestured vaguely at him, "this need to sound so profound, so intellectual. That's exactly the pretension I'm talking about when I criticize method acting." For the first time, Hardy allowed a smile to crack his stoic facade, but it was not a smile of warmth. It was the smile of a swordsman handed his opponent's weapon mid-duel. "Intellectual posturing," he repeated softly. "Joy, I have answered each of your questions directly. I have responded to each of your criticisms with clarity and consideration. If you interpret sincerity and depth as pretension, then I would gently suggest that says more about your own comfort level with substantive discourse than it says about my character." The words hit the studio with the force of a detonation. Silence followed, thick and radioactive. Joy opened her mouth, but only a faint gasp emerged, the sound of someone desperately searching for a counterstrike that refused to materialize. Hardy pressed forward, now in complete command. "You asked about my method. I explained it. You challenged that explanation. I questioned the basis of your challenge. You labeled my reply pretentious. And now," he said, voice unwavering, "I merely observe that dismissing a thoughtful exchange as pretentious often reveals more about one's own intellectual arsenal than it does about anyone else's." The camera zoomed in instinctively, like war photographers capturing the fall of a stronghold. Joy's self-assurance, the cornerstone of her on-air identity, cracked visibly. She looked not like the general she normally was, but like one witnessing her forces crumble beneath her. "This is absurd," she sputtered, a retreat disguised as indignation. "I'm simply trying to have a normal conversation." "Are you?" Hardy asked, raising one eyebrow with surgical precision. "Because from where I sit, it appears you arrived with a verdict already written. Your aim was to brand method acting as indulgent folly. And when presented with a counter-narrative, you rejected it without engaging with its substance. That is not a dialogue, Joy. That is a tribunal where the sentence is decided before the trial begins." The silence stretched, long and merciless. Joy's face shifted through hues of red as her mind raced, searching for a path back to control. The other hosts shrank into their chairs, clearly wishing they could fade into the set pieces. "Listen, I think we're straying from the path," Whoopi finally interjected, offering a lifeline. But Hardy was not finished. "On the contrary," he said, turning briefly toward Whoopi before zeroing in on Joy once more. "We are precisely on the path." Joy posed a question about method acting. One assumes she sought a discussion. My only aim is to understand her immediate hostility, especially given her lack of practical experience in the craft. Joy stiffened again, her jaw set hard. She was not accustomed to being analyzed on her own stage. "I'm not hostile to anything," she protested. "I just think some actors use method acting as an excuse to be difficult, and some actors likely do," Hardy conceded calmly, "just as some television hosts likely use their platforms as a cudgel against guests they dislike, rather than fostering genuine discourse. Should we then condemn all hosts by the actions of the worst?" The counterstrike landed with the force of a siege engine, and in that moment, the outcome of the battle became unmistakably cleared. Joy's eyes widened, a flicker of pure, unfiltered shock. The realization hit her instantly. Tom Hardy had taken her own logic, inverted it, and returned it with such devastating precision that it left her momentarily stunned. "That is entirely different," she protested, though the protest landed with the hollow ring of a weapon already dulled. "Is it?" Hardy inquired, his voice steady, framed with an almost professorial curiosity. "You suggest we judge an entire artistic discipline by its most flawed practitioners. I simply propose we apply the same principle to television hosting." "What exactly," he continued, "makes one critique valid and the other forbidden?" Sarah Haynes, sensing the room tightening like a drum, attempted a rescue. "Perhaps we could discuss the new film," but Joy cut her off sharply, unwilling to relinquish ground. "You are twisting my words, Tom. I never said all method actors should be judged by a few." Hardy regarded her with infinite patience. He looked less like a man embroiled in conflict, and more like a seasoned lecturer addressing a student who had fundamentally misread the assignment. His tone took on a Socratic clarity. "Actually, Joy, your precise words were that method acting is pretentious nonsense, and an excuse to behave badly. That seems, by any reasonable measure, to qualify as a sweeping generalization." He paused, then added with deadly politeness, "Would you like me to ask the producers to roll the tape?" The offer hung in the air like an executioner raising his blade. Joy shifted, the discomfort radiating through her posture. She knew millions were watching, witnessing the unraveling in real time. "I believe," she said stiffly, "that you're being intentionally obtuse." "Obtuse," Hardy repeated, amusement flickering at the edges of his voice. "Joy, I have been nothing if not direct. You made an assertion. I questioned it. You challenged my question. I highlighted how that challenge might be interpreted. Which part of that sequence strikes you as obtuse?" Joy was slipping visibly, audibly, irrevocably. Her usual arsenal, interruption, deflection, the quick rhetorical jab, failed her against an opponent who refused to be baited. Hardy followed every thread of logic to its inevitable end, leaving her no foothold. "You're just playing word games," she snapped, though even she seemed aware of how weak the accusation sounded. "Word games," Hardy repeated, eyebrows lifting. "Joy, words are the currency of ideas. If you are uncomfortable with their precise application, perhaps this medium is not your natural habitat." The implication that a veteran host might be unfit for her own profession landed with catastrophic force. Audible gasps erupted from the panel. Off camera, the crew gestured wildly, as if sheer panic could reverse the collision course unfolding before them. Joy's face drained of color, then flushed with furious red. "How dare you?" she hissed. "How dare you imply I don't belong here? I have been a titan of this industry longer than you've been a professional actor." "Have you, though?" Hardy asked softly. The simplicity of the question made it more devastating than any shouted accusation. "What exactly is the metric for success? Because from here, your methodology seems designed to generate heat, not light. You deploy loaded questions. You interrupt thoughtful answers. You attack guests for refusing to follow your predetermined script." His gaze sharpened. "Is that success, Joy? Or is it merely performance art?" The precision of his assessment was surgical. Viewers everywhere recognized the truth in his words, and the fact that he was proving his thesis in the very moment he stated it rendered the confrontation unforgettable. "I ask probing questions," Joy countered, though her voice trembled. "That is the work of a journalist." "Journalist." Hardy let the word linger between them, an indictment disguised as curiosity. "Joy, when was the last story you broke? When did you last engage in investigative reporting?" When have you done anything other than broadcast your opinions about the work of others? The distinction between journalism and punditry, often blurred, became crystal clear under Hardy's scrutiny. He had taken the sword she wielded so freely and turned the edge toward her. With chilling precision, he repositioned her not as a journalist, but as a provocateur. And the more she resisted, the deeper she sank into that role. Whoopi Goldberg, sensing the imminent collapse of the entire segment, made one last attempt to intervene. "Tom, maybe we should." But Joy could no longer be saved. Her pride was wounded, her authority eroding, and the unbearable truth settling in. She was losing a battle on her own stage, before an audience accustomed to seeing her win them. "You know what?" Joy exploded, her voice rising into a shrill crescendo. "I don't have to sit here and be lectured by some actor who thinks he's an intellectual." "Actually?" Hardy replied, voice cold and level as a blade. "You do have to sit there. This is your program. I am your guest. You invited me to discuss my work. And now you are enraged because I refuse to perform the role you scripted for this encounter." He leaned in slightly, delivering the final blow. "But here is the reality, Joy. I am not an actor in your drama. This is a dialogue between two adults. And if you find yourself unable to handle that, perhaps the issue lies not with me." The words landed with the quiet, irrevocable finality of a knockout punch. And at that moment, the battle was over. Joy sat perfectly still, frozen in a posture so rigid she seemed carved from stone. Her expression held a kind of stunned disbelief, the look of someone belatedly calculating the full scale of the disaster unfolding around her. In the span of mere minutes, she had been decisively and almost elegantly outmaneuvered, not by someone who shouted, or postured, or descended into theatrics, but by a man who never once raised his voice, never broke decorum, and never failed to treat her with unwavering professionalism. And yet, despite that courtesy, he had dismantled every piece of her offensive with surgical precision. "This is unbelievable," she whispered, barely audible. The words were not meant for Hardy, nor for the stunned studio, but for herself, a private lament that escaped before she could pull it back. "What precisely is unbelievable?" Hardy asked, pressing forward with the calm confidence of someone who already knew the answer. "Is it that someone has disagreed with you? That someone has asked you to substantiate your claims instead of having them accepted as gospel? Or perhaps that someone treated your inquiries with enough seriousness to give you honest, thoughtful answers rather than the scripted platitudes you expected?" Joy's mouth opened, then closed again, then opened once more, but no sound came. For a woman who had built an entire television empire on the foundation of always having a retort ready, always knowing the next line, the next jab, the next pivot, the sudden and absolute silence was its own indictment. Hardy leaned forward slightly, his tone softened not into kindness, but into something far worse, gentleness. "Joy, my intention here was simple. I came to discuss my work. You redirected the conversation into an attack on method acting. You did this, one assumes, because it would make compelling television." He let the words hang briefly before continuing. "But when I responded to your critique with seriousness, when I attempted to meet you at the level of an honest discussion, you grew agitated. So the question becomes, do you actually wish to engage, or do you merely wish to perform outrage for the sake of ratings?" The challenge echoed in the charged quiet of the studio. Joy stared at him, breath shallow, shoulders rising and falling in quick, uneven bursts. She searched desperately for a line, a rebuttal, a way out. But there was none. Hardy's phrase, "perform outrage for ratings," had landed with devastating accuracy, striking the most fragile and hidden corner of her professional identity. And everyone in the room knew it. "That's not," Joy began, but her voice fractured. "I don't perform anything. I offer my sincere opinions. Do you?" Hardy asked, and the sympathy in his tone was the cruelest cut of all. "Because from where I sit, it appears you came into this exchange with a scripted plan, attack method acting, push me onto the defensive, create some dramatic tension for the evening highlight reel. But when I answered your questions earnestly instead of playing the role you assigned me, you lost control. That suggests the dialogue itself was never actually your goal." Joy's hands were trembling, the movement visible even to those watching at home. She cast a pleading glance around the table, silently begging for support. But her co-hosts suddenly found their notes fascinating. Even Whoopi, usually the first to jump in and defend a colleague, kept her gaze locked downward. "I asked the questions our viewers want answered." Joy insisted, though her voice had lost the conviction that usually propelled it. "Do they?" Hardy pressed, gentle but relentless. "Do viewers truly want to watch you berate your guests? Or have you simply decided that conflict equals good television? Because from where I sit, this doesn't feel like journalism. It doesn't even feel like entertainment. It feels like bullying. The word hit Joy like a physical blow. Bullying. No one had ever dared say it to her, certainly not on her own show, in front of millions. The studio air seemed to constrict around her as the terrible truth of the accusation seeped in. "I am not a bully," she whispered, but the words were hollow, devoid of even the faintest conviction. "Are you not?" Hardy replied calmly. "You use your platform to attack people who cannot respond without risking their professionalism. You interrupt them when they try to explain themselves. You dismiss their perspective without listening. And when your arguments begin to falter, you pivot to personal insult. If you saw this behavior in anyone else, what would you call it?" Joy's breathing grew shallow, verging on panic. Each of Hardy's points struck with unerring accuracy. She knew it. The audience knew it. Her colleagues knew it. And worst of all, the millions watching at home knew it. She was unraveling in real time. She said finally, grasping for authority she no longer possessed, "I have a right to ask difficult questions." "Absolutely," Hardy said at once. "But I have a right to provide difficult answers. And your guests have the right to be treated with basic respect, even in disagreement. The issue has never been the questions you ask. The issue is that you believe asking them exempts you from ever having to answer any yourself." A strained, desperate silence followed. Sarah finally attempted a rescue. "Maybe we should cut to commercial." But it was already too late. Something fundamental within Joy had cracked. The wall between the persona she performed and the insecurities she hid had been shattered. "No," Joy said, voice breaking. "No, we're not cutting." "No," Joy said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I want to see this through." She turned toward Hardy with a mix of fury and desperation. "You sit there looking so smug, so superior, as if you've cracked some code. But you have no idea what it's like to work in this business as a woman. You don't know what I've had to endure, what I've had to survive, just to stay in this seat." For the first time since the confrontation began, something in Hardy's expression shifted. The strategic calm slipped, replaced by something more deeply human. "You're right," he said, quietly. "I don't know what your experience has been, and I am not trying to diminish or dismiss the very real obstacles you've faced. But Joy, none of that can serve as a justification for treating other people with cruelty. Being a woman in a hostile industry is a reason to demand better standards, not permission to abandon them." The gentleness in his voice, unexpected, uncalculated, landed far more brutally than any accusation he'd made before. It cracked the last of Joy's composure. Tears welled in her eyes, rising faster than she could blink them away. Her professional mask, the one she'd worn for years, the one that had never once failed her, crumbled completely. "You don't understand," she whispered. Gone was the dominating presence, the sharp-edged host wielding outrage like a blade. In her place was someone exhausted, someone unraveling. "If I'm not the aggressive one, if I'm not the one pushing the hard questions, driving the moment forward, then what am I? What is my purpose?" "That," Hardy replied softly, "is the wrong question." Joy blinked through tears as he continued. "Your strength was never in the ambush or the theatrics. It was never in the sparring. Your true gift was your curiosity, your ability to guide people through complicated conversations, to draw meaning from chaos. You created a space for dialogue, but that strength is useless if you care more about performing conflict than pursuing truth." And that was the moment everything broke. Her shoulders collapsed inward, her face crumpling as tears streamed freely down her cheeks. The cameras captured every second with merciless clarity. Her co-hosts, silent witnesses to this modern-day tragedy, looked on with horror. They were watching not just a colleague unravel, but a persona evaporate. A career identity being stripped away in real time. "I can't do this anymore," she said at last. The words fractured, half sob, half surrender. She stood the motion shaky but unmistakably final. "I cannot sit here and pretend this is working. It's not. Tom, you're right. You're right about everything. And I hate it. I hate that you're right. I hate that you forced me to see it. And I hate that I've built a whole career on something I'm apparently not even good at holding together." A suffocating silence swept across the studio. Then came the sharp, decisive click of Joy removing her microphone. Hardy rose instinctively, as if to steady her, to offer some gesture of peace, but she shot up a hand. "Don't," she warned. "Don't you dare soften this blow. Don't offer comfort. You came here to promote your work, and instead you've held up a mirror, not just to me, but to everyone watching. You showed the world exactly who I've become. And the worst part, you did it without an ounce of cruelty. You won simply by refusing to play along. She turned toward the camera, mascara streaked, cheeks wet, but her voice steadied into something almost chilling in its clarity. You know what, viewers? Tom is right. I have been performing rage for ratings. I've treated guests not as human beings with something to say, but as props in my own drama. And I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted from attacking people who give thoughtful answers, exhausted from pretending outrage is insight, exhausted from being the caricature I created. Behind her, Hardy remained standing, torn between compassion and distance, between consolation and respect. Joy, you don't have to, he began. Oh yes, she cut in sharply, I do. Because this is the first truthful moment this show has seen in years, and it had to come from a guest breaking through my defenses. Is that journalism? Is that good television? No, it's pathetic. Her gaze swept over her co-hosts, then locked once again on the lens. I built a fortress around my image, brick by brick, based on being the tough interrogator, the one who intimidated everyone. But somewhere in the battle, I forgot the point of asking hard questions to get real answers, not to manufacture chaos. She looked back at Hardy. Thank you for showing me the monster I've become. I don't like it, but I needed to see it. He nodded solemn. Seeing it, he said, is the first step toward changing it. Maybe, Joy replied, but I can't change it here. Not on this set. Not under these rules. Not inside this persona I've trapped myself in. I have to rediscover who I actually am before I can offer anything truthful to an audience. And with that, she walked off the set. Silence engulfed the studio. Hardy lowered himself slowly into his chair, shaken by the magnitude of what had unfolded. Well, Whoopi said at last, voice thin. I guess we should go to commercial. As the cameras powered down, Hardy exhaled and murmured, I hope she's okay. And the sincerity in his voice carried more weight than any on-air exchange. And that is how one of television's fiercest gladiators left the arena, not taken down by scandal or controversy, but by a quiet man who refused to be her opponent. In the end, the most devastating weapon against someone who performs anger is simple honesty. So tell me, what's your verdict? Did Joy deserve the reckoning? Or should a guest be expected to play along with the spectacle?